I stood there frozen, while my own father lifted his glass, smiled at a room full of CEOs, generals, politicians, and said the words I'll never forget. I'm proud of my children. Well, most of them. The laughter that followed wasn't polite. It was sharp, cutting. People actually turned in their seats to look at me, the failure, the disappointment. The soldier who in their eyes had traded wealth and power for mediocrity. Then he did it, pointed directly at me like I wasn't even standing there. You should probably leave before you embarrass the family any further. It wasn't the first time he humiliated me, but it was the last time he ever would. What none of them knew was that while they were laughing, while they mocked me in front of the richest and most powerful people in this city, I was quietly holding the pen that was about to sign their entire empire into dust. I wasn't just the disappointment, I was the reckoning. Before we dive into today's story, take a moment to share where you're watching from. We love seeing how our stories bring people together from every corner of the world. Your thoughts and comments are what make this community so special, and we're truly grateful to have you here. If you haven't already, don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story filled with drama, resilience, and unexpected twists. Now settle in, get comfortable, and maybe grab your favorite drink, because this is a tale you won't want to miss. Let's get started. I always thought the sting would dull over time. You know the way people say wounds heal, scars fade. They lied. Some scars don't fade. They just go deeper. It started with a phone call I should have ignored. A brief pause. Then my father's voice, cold, clinical. There's a retirement dinner for me next month. You're expected to attend, not invited. Expected. That's how Gerald Chandler operated. I gripped the phone tighter, jaw tense. You're retiring. I repeated more to myself than to him. The man I grew up with wasn't the retiring type. Not from life, not from control. I assume you'll be decent enough to show up, he added, as if my existence was an inconvenience he had to factor into the evening's head count. No apology, no warmth, just obligation disguised as a summons. I'll be there, I said flat, detached. I wish I could say it was because I cared, but it wasn't. Somewhere deep down, it was the soldier in me that couldn't ignore an order even from a man who'd spent my entire life making sure I knew I wasn't enough. Because to Gerald, success was measured in numbers, net worth, shareholder value. How many boardrooms bowed when you walked in? And as far as he was concerned, I was the statistical anomaly in the Chandler bloodline. A soldier. A man who traded Wall Street for war zones. In his words, a waste of potential. The weight of that never fully left me. Not when I pinned on my first lieutenant's bars, not when I became a company commander, not even the day a general shook my hand and called me the kind of leader this country needs. None of it ever erased the look my father gave me the day I chose service over stocks, a look that said, "You're dead to me." Still, the sense of duty never really left my bones, so I said yes. I always did. A week later, the official invitation arrived, because even when Gerald demanded the appearance of civility was mandatory. Heavy cardstock, embossed gold lettering, Chandler family crest at the top. You are cordially invited to the retirement celebration of Gerald L. Chandler, founder and CEO of Axiom Defense Systems. The venue, the Silvers Club, Midtown Manhattan, an invite-only fortress of old money and unspoken power, a place designed for people like my father, people who measured their lives in assets, not memories. And right there, etched in bold at the bottom, attendance expected. Formal attire, no exceptions, not requested. expected. It wasn't subtle. It never was. I set the invitation down on my kitchen counter, staring at it like it might ignite. This wasn't just a dinner. This was a stage, a performance, a final act in Gerald Chandler's legacy, where everyone would clap, sip champagne, and pretend they hadn't spent decades enabling a man who traded integrity for influence. And somewhere in the back row, I was supposed to sit quietly, smile politely, nod when spoken to, like I always had. Except this time, things were different. Because what Gerald didn't know, what no one in that room knew, was that I wasn't coming just as his disappointment of a son. I was coming with orders of my own. For months, I'd worked alongside a joint task force between the Department of Defense DOJ and Internal Revenue Service. For years, Axiom Defense had skirted legal lines laundering billions through shell corporations, falsifying defense contracts, and manipulating foreign governments. And while Gerald built an empire convincing the world he was an untouchable titan, the noose had been tightening, quietly, legally, relentlessly. My presence at that retirement dinner wasn't just familial. It was tactical. And maybe, just maybe, it was personal too. The week leading up to it felt heavier than most deployments. My uniform remained in the closet. I wouldn't be wearing it that night, not officially. That was the point. This wasn't a military op. It was something far messier. A family operation. As the date approached, the briefings became sharper. Red Hawk, our internal task force, confirmed surveillance was active, data intercepts complete, financial trails locked. The operation was ready. The question wasn't if it would happen. It was when. And that when was set to explode inside the most gilded room in New York. Then the final piece clicked into place. A text came in, guest list confirmed. All targets attending. Event greenlit. Execute on confirmation. I stared at it for a long minute, not because I doubted the mission, but because the boy in me, the one who'd spent his entire life being told he was less than still, lingered in the corners of my mind. This wasn't just about taking down corruption. It was about looking my father in the eye and showing him that the very son he dismissed, humiliated and discarded, was the one holding the pen to end his empire. I slipped the phone into my pocket, straightened my jacket. "See you soon, Dad." The doorman barely glanced at me as he opened the towering brass doors to the Silvers Club. He didn't need to. This place was built for people like my father. Old money, new power, and anyone who could write seven-figure checks without blinking. The marble floor gleamed so bright it looked like glass. Chandeliers the size of SUV tires sparkled overhead. Crystal gold silence and judgment. Always judgment. Ethan Chandler, guest of Mr. Gerald Chandler. I stated to the check-in woman whose nameplate read Genevieve. Her polite smile thinned when she heard the last name. "Ah, Mr. Chandler. Yes, right this way." She led me toward the main hall, a cavernous ballroom framed by floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Midtown Manhattan. Inside a sea of tailored tuxedos and designer gowns mingled beneath soft amber lighting, waiters floated between clusters of billionaires, hedge fund managers, politicians, and defense contractors. A curated ecosystem of power. I wasn't 5 steps in before I heard the familiar voice. "Well, well, if it isn't the prodigal disappointment." I turned. Nathan, my older brother, same sharp jawline, same slicked-back hair, same empty smirk he'd worn since the day he realized our father valued him more. He stepped forward, straightened his cufflinks, and tilted his head. "Didn't expect you to show." Thought you'd be too busy chasing insurgents in some desert backwater. Retired the desert. Tonight I figured I'd observe a different kind of hostile territory." He scoffed, nudging Vivian, who stood next to him. "You hear that, Viv? He's learning jokes. Vivian Chandler, sister. By blood, stranger by choice." She scanned me top to bottom, her gaze dripping with the same practiced disdain she wore like designer perfume. "Cute suit," she said. "Did they issue that on base, or is it off-the-rack custom?" I shot back. "It comes with something you two don't own, honor." Her smile faded for half a second. Just half. But it was enough. Nathan grinned wider, but before he could throw another punch disguised as conversation, a different voice interrupted. "Ah, the elusive Major Chandler, Richard Moreland, CEO of Axiom Defense Systems, my father's closest business ally, and one of the primary targets of the federal investigation." He glided toward us, whiskey in hand, the smell of money and manipulation practically trailing behind him. "Ethan?" "I must say, surprised to see you. I figured you'd grown tired of these civilized settings." His smile was razor thin. "Civilized is generous," I said, holding his gaze. He chuckled. "Always blunt. Well, some of us build things that last. Others point guns for a living." Nathan chuckled. Vivian didn't even hide her laugh. I leaned in just enough for my voice to drop. "And some of us build empires on fraud shell companies and offshore accounts. But I suppose we all serve in our own way." Richard's smile didn't move, but his eyes shifted just enough to betray that he heard me loud and clear. "Careful, Ethan," he murmured. "Some things are best left unsaid. Or unheard." I held the stare for a beat longer. Noted. Before anyone else could speak, the event organizer tapped a microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, please take your seats. Dinner will be served shortly." The ballroom shifted as people began filing toward tables draped in white linen, each centerpiece an absurd display of flowers flown in from Ecuador or some equally impractical place. As I walked to my assigned table predictably, the farthest one from the stage, a hand grazed my shoulder. I turned, already tense. "Relax, Major." A familiar face. Agent Daniels, DOJ. Clean-cut, wire-framed glasses, dressed like a guest. "Surveillance is up. Red Hawk is in position. Signals confirm all 4 targets are present. Gerald, Nathan, Vivian, and Moreland. Financial crimes. Wire fraud. Defense contract fraud. Money laundering. Plus possible violations of the Arms Export Control Act. Copy that." Daniels adjusted his cufflink, a subtle code. "Execute on your call." "Understood." "Stand by." He faded back into the crowd like smoke. As I sat, the orchestra played some classical nonsense that nobody actually cared about. Waiters filed in with the first course, a microscopic arrangement of foie gras, truffle foam, and something green that looked more like garnish than food. I barely touched it. At the table next to mine sat Nathan, Vivian, and their entourage. Occasionally, I caught pieces of conversation. Full acquisition by Q3 hedge funds at 16% return. No, the SEC's too busy with crypto. All noise. All theater. A bubble so thick none of them realized it was seconds from bursting. Halfway through the second course, Richard Moreland slid into the empty seat beside me uninvited. "Tell me, Ethan," he began, swirling his whiskey. "How long do you plan to play this little game?" "Not sure I follow." His voice dropped. "You think we don't know what this is, you being here? The timing? The questions? You've poked the wrong bear." I kept my face neutral. "It's a family dinner, Richard. Surely you don't mean to suggest there's anything improper about my presence." He leaned in, all pretense of politeness gone. "You're poking around things that are far above your clearance level, Major. You don't want to play this hand. I'm pretty sure it's my hand to play." He stared, calculating. "Careful. People like you, with your sense of righteousness, often forget that integrity doesn't buy leverage. It doesn't pay for lawyers or security. Good thing I've got something else, I said. It's called jurisdiction. For the first time, his eyes flickered real concern masked as irritation. He straightened his cuffs and smirked. You should enjoy dinner, Major. It may be your last one in polite society. He walked off, melting into the crowd. My phone buzzed once, a silent vibration under the table. A text. Target. Richard confirmed attempted intimidation. Logged. Continue. The system was working. Then came the moment I knew was inevitable. Ethan. My father's voice. I turned. Gerald Chandler stood above me, tall, broad, a tailored tuxedo so sharp it could cut glass. His expression was perfectly measured, somewhere between disappointment and disdain. Let's speak. Not a request. A directive. The same tone he'd used when I was 8 and forgot to shake hands with some senator at one of his galas. I stood following him toward the balcony overlooking the city skyline. For a moment, there was silence, just the muted hum of traffic below and the buzz of people inside. Then he turned. What are you doing here? I was invited. Or did you forget? Cut the crap, Ethan. His eyes narrowed. You've been asking questions, showing up where you don't belong. Funny. That's exactly how I've felt for the last 30 years. A muscle in his jaw tightened. I built something. Something real, and I will not have it undone by a petulant child who threw away his future to play soldier. I didn't throw it away, I said, stepping closer. I traded it for something you'll never understand. His eyes darkened. What's your endgame, Ethan? What's the goal here? You think the system you serve cares about you? You think those stars on your shoulders matter in this room more than anything you've ever built? A bitter smile crossed his face. Then let's see how far that gets you tonight. He walked away, leaving me standing there, not as his son, not as his failure, but as the man who would end everything he believed made him untouchable. Enjoy the party, Dad. For as long as I could remember, I'd been the family's cautionary tale. The example whispered over champagne glasses. This is what happens when you don't follow the plan. And tonight, in this marble palace dressed up as a retirement party, they were about to make sure everyone knew it. As I walked back into the ballroom from the balcony, I could feel the shift. It was subtle at first. Side glances, quick whispers. People weren't looking at me like I was just a guest anymore. I was a curiosity now. Something to be talked about, measured, ranked, dismissed. Then the lights dimmed. A hush swept through the room as a spotlight hit the stage. There he was, Gerald Chandler, my father. Standing at the podium, adjusting his silk tie, scanning the crowd like a general surveying his troops. A man who'd built an empire from defense contracts, offshore accounts, and carefully cultivated fear. The applause was polite, practiced just loud enough to be obligatory, not warm enough to be sincere. He tapped the microphone. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here. Tonight isn't just about my retirement. It's about legacy. The word hung in the air like a loaded weapon. Legacy, he repeated, pacing slightly. It's not something you inherit. It's something you build, something you pass on to those who are worthy of it. My stomach tightened. And I've been blessed he continued to raise children who have carried that legacy forward. Nathan, brilliant in finance, a mind sharper than any knife. Vivian, a legal powerhouse protecting this family's interests with precision and grace. The cameras flashed. Applause rippled through the room, then he paused. His eyes scanned until they landed on me. And he smiled, slow, deliberate, cruel. Of course, not every child lives up to that legacy. A few chuckles from the crowd. Nervous, unsure. But my father wasn't finished. Some choose other paths. Less productive ones. Some abandon the opportunities they were given. Walk away from the future we built for them to play dress-up in uniform. Laughter. Louder this time. Less nervous. They were following his lead. I felt the heat rise in my face. Not shame, not anymore. Just fury. In every family he went on, there's always one. The crowd tensed, waiting for the punchline. And he delivered. Gerald Chandler pointed right at me, in front of 300 people. CEOs, senators, generals, contractors. One who squanders. One who disappoints. One you politely ignore at events like this. The room erupted. Laughter. Full. Open. Cruel. I sat there, stone still, staring, memorizing every face, every smirk, every sideways glance. Nathan raised his champagne glass toward me, grinning like a cartoon villain. Vivian smirked behind her wine-glass eyes, glittering with satisfaction. This isn't humiliation, I told myself. This is evidence. Because they didn't know, not yet. Gerald continued, but tonight isn't about failure. Tonight is about celebrating those who succeed, who understand that loyalty to family is paramount, who understand that real success isn't in medals, but in ownership, in wealth, in power. The toast was loud, glasses clinked, and for the first time in years, I felt something deeper than anger, deeper than grief. Clarity. They'd drawn the line in ink. Permanent. Public. Perfect. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A single vibration. Coded. Execute on next signal. Surveillance live. Audio lock confirmed. Targets in position. I stood. Calm. Collected. Walked slowly toward the bar. And that's when I heard it. A conversation. Not whispered. Not hidden. Because why would they hide anything? In their world, they were untouchable. Richard Moreland, leaning against the marble counter, talking to a man in a navy suit I didn't recognize, but knew instantly a senior procurement officer from the Department of Defense. No, listen. Richard was saying, the parts don't have to pass inspection. They never have. That's why we pay Wilcox. And if Wilcox gets shaky, we have the judge on standby. Paperwork's already drafted to delay any audit 6 months minimum. What about the Brazilian deal Navy suit? Asked. Richard took a sip of his whiskey. Running through the Dubai shell. Completely sanitized. Even if Treasury looks, they'll never link it. Gerald locked it airtight. And the components for the UAE contract. Richard's smile turned vicious. Look, half of it's junk. Doesn't matter. They'll sign off anyway, as long as the right people get their envelopes. I tapped my phone twice. Live transmission activated. Every word was now logged at the DOJ, the IRS, the FBI, and Department of Defense counterintelligence. It kept going. Wilcox, another board member, joined them mid-sentence. And the drone parts out of Shenzhen, Richard shrugged. Cheap sensors. Who cares if the calibration's off the end? User won't notice until it's someone else's problem. And what if it costs lives? Navy suit asked. Richard's laugh was ice cold. Not our lives. I squeezed the phone. Fingernails dug into my palm. This isn't just fraud, I realized. This is blood. This is death dressed up in contracts and quarterly earnings. Suddenly, another familiar voice cut in, sharper, faster. Nathan, listen, we move the money before end of quarter, flip it through the Cayman account, then backdoor it into the Singapore shell. Dad signed off. Viv's already drafted the legal shield if Treasury asks questions. That fast? Richard asked. Relax. Nathan grinned. We've done it 12 times. This one's bulletproof. It wasn't. Not tonight. Because the audio logs were streaming live. Tagged. Backed up. Immutable. Excuse me. I turned. Vivian. Standing there with that perfect Ice Queen smile. Did you think you could just slither in here and what? Feel relevant for a night? She said softly, but her tone was pure venom. No, I said. I'm here for the show. The show, yeah. I smiled sharp as a knife. It's about to start. Her smile faltered. Just for a beat. Enough. I stepped past her, headed straight for the center of the ballroom. Because sometimes, the best way to kill a snake isn't with a stick. It's by burning the whole damn nest. Gerald was back at the podium, basking in the applause. He opened his mouth to continue, and then it happened. A voice from the audio system. Not his. Not part of the program. The Dubai shell is clean. Gerald locked it airtight. If the calibration's off the end, user won't notice until it's someone else's problem. We've done it 12 times. This one's bulletproof. Gasps. People looking around, confused. Murmurs building into panic. Then a second feed flashing on the giant screen behind the podium. Bank records. Wire transfers. Shell companies. Side-by-side photos. Gerald, Richard, Nathan, Vivian. Names. Amounts. Transactions. Silence. A heavy, suffocating silence. Then, chaos. Turn it off, Gerald bellowed. What the hell is this? Senator shouted. Nathan lunged for the AV table. Slipped. Crashed into a chair. Scrambled to pull cords that didn't exist. The data was coming from a remote server. Vivian screamed at the staff. Shut it down! Shut it down now! It was too late. Because as the images flipped through Cayman accounts, arms shipments, bribery memos, a new sound echoed through the hall. Federal agents, nobody move, black vests, yellow letters, DOJ, FBI, IRS, guns drawn, badges raised, commanding presence. Gerald Chandler, you are under arrest for conspiracy wire fraud, defense contract fraud, and multiple counts of money laundering. Panic, screams, chairs knocked over, people shoving for exits. And me, I stood dead center. Calm. Watching as the family who'd spent a lifetime laughing at me collapsed. Nathan tried to run. 2 agents tackled him. His face slammed against marble, his hands cuffed behind his back. Vivian sobbed, collapsed to the floor. This isn't happening. This isn't happening, Richard Moreland pinned against a wall, cursing, shouting about lawyers. Gerald turned toward me. You did this. You traitor. You disgrace. You're not my son. I stepped forward, looked him dead in the eye. You're right. I'm not your son anymore. The sound of handcuffs snapping shut echoed louder than the ballroom's $1,000 crystal chandeliers ever could. Chaos wasn't just bubbling beneath the surface anymore, it had burst wide open. People shoved, chairs toppled. The rich and powerful of Manhattan men and women who'd spent their lives controlling rooms like this were suddenly reduced to panicked spectators. But not Gerald Chandler. No, my father didn't panic. He didn't run. He did what he always did, he postured. Stand down! He bellowed at the federal agents as though sheer force of will could overwrite the U.S. legal system. Do you have any idea who I am? An agent in a Navy windbreaker didn't even blink. Yeah, you're Gerald Chandler, and you're under arrest. The click of another set of cuffs behind me signaled Nathan getting dragged to his feet, face red, screaming profanities. Somewhere to my right, Vivian was practically hyperventilating as two IRS agents boxed her in. Richard Moreland. He wasn't posturing. He wasn't talking. His hands were already up, palms trembling. Coward to the very end. And yet through the frenzy, one voice cut the noise. Not an agent, not a bystander. It was Richard. Eyes locked on me. Wait. Hold on. Are you... Major General Chandler, silence. An immediate, suffocating silence. People who'd been scrambling for exits stopped mid-step. Heads turned. Eyes darted between me and Richard, then over to Gerald, who had gone sheet white. Even the federal agents momentarily hesitated, their hands firm, but their attention flickering. The words hung in the air, heavier than anything that had come before. I didn't rush my answer. I wanted them to feel it. I straightened my jacket, stepped forward, and said loud enough for everyone to hear. That's correct. Major General Ethan Chandler, United States Department of Defense. Task Force Red Hawk, Counterintelligence and Fraud Division. A ripple passed through the room, shock, disbelief, even horror. Someone gasped. A senator actually dropped his glass. Nathan's mouth moved, but no words came out. Vivian's knees buckled and she caught herself on a chair. But Gerald, my father, he didn't move, didn't speak. His face didn't just go pale. It turned the color of ash. You, he finally croaked. You lied. You lied to me, to all of us. I shook my head. No, Dad. I finally told the truth. You just never bothered to ask. The lead agent cleared his throat, snapping back to task. We're seizing all financial and physical assets linked to Axiom Defense and its subsidiaries, per warrants signed by the Federal District Court of New York in coordination with the Department of Justice, Department of Defense, and the IRS. Richard's knees gave out. Two agents caught him before he hit the floor. Gerald tried one last time. I built this. I built all of this. His voice cracked rage, trying desperately to mask fear. You think you can just take it on whose authority? I stepped closer, locking eyes with him. Mine. And then, the sound. The heavy, unmistakable clunk of the ballroom's main doors locking from the inside. Agents swarmed the exits, securing every pathway. Nobody in, nobody out. Screens flickered back to life, this time, not showing financial records or shell companies. No. Now, it was video footage. Hidden recordings of boardroom meetings, phone calls captured, Gerald's own voice clear as day, delay the shipments, fudge the specs, as long as payments clear the DoD doesn't care. The crowd, those who hadn't already tried to vanish, stood frozen. It was over. Ethan, my father's voice dropped, barely a whisper now. You don't understand what you've done. I stepped right into his space. No, Dad. You don't understand. You raised me to believe the world was ours to control. That rules were for other people. The decency was a weakness. I pointed toward the agents dragging Nathan toward the elevator, his shoes scraping marble. You taught me to be ruthless. Then toward Vivian, sobbing into her hands as the IRS agent read off asset seizure orders. You taught me that family was transactional, and then back at him. So I applied everything you ever taught me, just not the way you wanted. His jaw worked, but no words came. The lead DOJ agent raised his voice. Ladies and gentlemen, this property is now considered a federal crime scene. If your name is not on this guest list or in a legal employment contract with the government, you are ordered to vacate the premises immediately. Silence. Then, the rush. Half the guests bolted hedge fund managers, politicians, contractors, sprinting in $1,000 shoes. Phones buzzed like hives. People tripped over chairs. A woman in a green gown muttered, "I have a flight to catch," as if extradition wouldn't be an issue. But I stayed where I was. right in front of Gerald, watching as the empire collapsed around him. "I was going to leave it to you," Gerald finally whispered. "All of it. You could have had it. You could have had everything." I smiled. For the first time, a real smile. "You never had anything worth leaving." He lunged, fast, surprising, hands grabbing for my collar, pure instinct. But he wasn't faster than 2 federal agents who pinned him to the ground before his fingers reached fabric. "This is assault on a federal officer," one of them barked. "Add it to the list." Nathan was still screaming as they loaded him into the back of a federal SUV outside. "This is illegal. I'm Nathan Chandler. Do you know who I am?" "Yes." "We did." Vivian's voice broke into a million jagged pieces. "Please! Please! There's been a mistake! I didn't know! I didn't know!" A female IRS agent deadpan shoved a file in her face. "Exhibit D, your signature. On the Cayman transfers. $12 million. Vivian crumbled, and me, I walked. Right down the center of that ballroom, past the cuffed executives, past the shattered facade of my family, past the chandeliers now seeming ridiculous and small. Phones followed me, eyes followed me, whispers trailed me like smoke. Is it true he's a general? Did he orchestrate this? Was this the plan all along? Yes. Yes, it was. At the exit, I paused, turned back. Gerald on his knees, now hands cuffed behind him, head bowed, not in defeat, but in disbelief. Like his mind simply couldn't compute that the game was over. Nathan, Vivian, Richard, all done. "Dad," I called. His head snapped up. This was never personal. I paused, let it hang. "No, actually, that's a lie. This was always personal." The agents led him away. Outside, flashing lights bathed the street in red and blue. News vans screeched to a stop. Reporters shoved mics toward anyone breathing. "Is it true the Chandlers have been arrested? Are these federal charges? Are government contracts involved?" No comment. The DOJ agents pushed the reporters back, but I didn't need to say anything. The images on the screens inside were more than enough. Every stolen dollar, every falsified contract, every lie, public, documented, permanent. The Chandler name wouldn't just be destroyed, it would be synonymous with corruption. The agents finished loading the last of the suspects. The lead officer nodded to me. "We'll take it from here, sir." I returned the nod. "Thank you." Then walked. Past the reporters, past the flashing lights, past the world I used to belong to, and for the first time in my life, I walked away, completely free. By dawn, the headlines had already detonated. Chandler Empire collapses in federal raid. FBI seizes assets, arrests. Billionaire family and a defense CEO. Nation's biggest defense. Fraud case unfolds live on camera. CNN ran it on a loop. Fox News brought in 4 analysts. CNBC called it the largest white-collar takedown in a decade. Social media, unforgiving. The clips from the ballroom, Nathan screaming, Vivian sobbing, Gerald's face crumbling under the weight of handcuffs, circulated millions of times by breakfast. Chandler collapse trended globally. And that was just the beginning. At 7:14 a.m., the DOJ held a press conference. Multiple defendants, including Gerald Chandler, founder and former CEO of Axiom Defense Systems, Richard Moreland, current CEO of Axiom Defense, Nathan Chandler, head of Chandler Global Finance, and Vivian Chandler, senior partner at Chandler Law Group, have been arrested and charged with wire fraud securities, fraud racketeering conspiracy to defraud the United States, and multiple violations of the Arms Export Control Act. The spokesperson didn't flinch. The evidence includes financial records, wiretaps, video surveillance, and testimony from whistleblowers. All federal assets and properties tied to these crimes have been seized. Cameras flashed. Reporters shouted. Is it true the whistleblower was Ethan Chandler? Was this an inside job from the Department of Defense? Is the Chandler family finished? I wasn't there. I didn't need to be. I was already watching from a secured conference room inside the DOJ's Manhattan field office. Calm, composed, watching as the empire that spent its existence tearing me down burned to the ground. A lead prosecutor turned to me. It's rare, she said, that someone gets to dismantle the very machine that tried to destroy them. Yeah, I replied, sipping black coffee. But it's long overdue. By noon, the asset seizures were rolling in like a military operation. The Chandler estate in Greenwich seized. Every last marble column wine cellar and 14-car garage. Nathan's Manhattan penthouse seized. The Bugatti parked downstairs was already being loaded onto a flatbed. Vivian's Bridgehampton summer home gone. Along with her trust fund, her offshore accounts, and every property attached to the family name. Axiom's headquarters raided. Servers yanked. Boardrooms emptied. Entire floors shuttered behind yellow evidence tape. Even Richard Moreland's $32 million townhouse on the Upper East Side wasn't spared. Watching agents carry out original Monet's rare Persian rugs and safes the size of refrigerators felt like poetic justice. But the money wasn't the real victory. It was watching power disintegrate. Watching their faces as the walls closed in not just legally, but socially. Phone calls stopped getting answered. Lawyers who once fought to represent them now dodged them. Friends gone. Even the charities that once bragged about Chandler donations quietly deleted their names from websites. They weren't just disgraced, they were radioactive. The arraignment was surreal. There they were, my father, my brother, my sister, Richard, lined up like any other defendants. No special suits, no designer watches, just standard-issue jumpsuits in an icy shade of humiliation. The judge read the charges, one by one. Wire fraud, conspiracy, racketeering, money laundering, defense contract fraud, export violations. Each one carried years, decades in prison. Gerald, ever the strategist, tried one last time to play the game. Your Honor, he began, this is a misunderstanding. The judge cut him off. Save it for trial, Mr. Chandler. Bail denied. Nathan lost it. You can't do this. I'm Nathan Chandler. I ran Chandler. Global, you can't. The bailiff dragged him back to his seat like a toddler mid-tantrum. Vivian buried her face in her hands, mascara bleeding down her cheeks. Richard sat motionless, like a man who realized the next 20 years of his life were going to be spent staring at cinder block walls. That night, every news anchor in America said it out loud. This is the end of the Chandler dynasty. And it was. Every company tied to the family liquidated, holdings dissolved. The DOJ and IRS split the proceeds between victim compensation funds, federal restitution, and Defense Department clawbacks. My father's name, once printed on the walls of universities, hospitals, and political campaigns, became a symbol of everything rotten about unchecked power. Corporate sponsors vanished. Board seats were stripped. His face, a man who once boasted that laws are for the poor, was now plastered next to the word felon. And the calls, oh, the calls. Senators, generals, former CEOs. Ethan. Listen, we were always, look, we didn't know Major General Chandler if there's anything we can do. Just So you know we always respected you. I didn't answer most. Some I let go straight to voicemail just to hear the panic in their voices. I wasn't petty, but I wasn't forgiving either. And Nathan's hedge fund collapsed within 24 hours. Investors filed suits. The SEC moved in like sharks. His accounts were frozen. His assets, cars, art, cryptocurrency wallets were liquidated to pay restitution. He cried on national television. Cried. They set me up, I didn't know. This is all my father's doing. The internet didn't buy it. His face became a meme overnight when you find out crime has consequences. Vivian wasn't spared either. The Bar Association yanked her license. Permanently. Fraud. Ethics violations. Financial misconduct. She cried during the hearing. Cried harder when the FBI seized her law firm's accounts. Gone were the brunches in the Hamptons, the country club memberships, the lifestyle that revolved around sneering at anyone who didn't fit her perfect, curated existence. By week's end, her social media profiles were deleted. Her so-called friends posted inspirational quotes about cleansing your circle like she was some bad energy they were purging. And Richard. The Department of Defense made an example out of him. His personal fortune wiped. His professional reputation destroyed. Every contract axiom ever touched was under review. But it was the prison sentence that hit hardest. 30 years. No parole. A fitting price for selling defective weapons, for endangering soldiers, for laundering money under the guise of patriotism. And Gerald, for a man who once said prison is for people who can't afford lawyers, the irony was biblical. He wasn't allowed to plead out. The DOJ refused, said it would send the wrong message. When the judge read the final sentence, 35 years in federal prison without parole, my father's hands didn't shake. His face didn't crack. But his eyes, for the first time in my entire life, his eyes showed something I had never seen. Fear. Not fear of prison. Fear of irrelevance, of being forgotten. The man who spent his life building a name, a legacy, an empire, would now die behind a concrete wall where no one whispered his name in reverence ever again. I didn't attend the sentencing hearings. Didn't need to. I already knew how the story ended. And more importantly, I was too busy writing my next chapter. Because while the world was busy watching the Chandlers collapse, I was building something entirely different. A foundation. The Chandler Integrity Project. A non-profit designed to investigate defense fraud, protect whistleblowers, and support military families affected by corporate corruption. Funded entirely by the liquidation of the Chandler family assets. Their empire was built on exploitation, I told the press. Ours will be built on justice. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. Gerald's name would live on, just not in the way he ever intended. A week later, I signed the papers for my new home. A modest sunlit house in Westchester. Big enough for the life I actually wanted. No marble floors, no gilded chandeliers, no pretense. Just peace. That afternoon, as I unpacked boxes, a neighbor walked by with his golden retriever. "Hey," he said, offering a handshake. "Welcome to the neighborhood." I shook it. "Thanks. I'm Ethan." He smiled. No recognition, no sideways glance, no whispers about the Chandlers. Just a neighbor. "You served?" he asked, nodding toward the folded flag sitting on my bookshelf. "Yeah. Well, thank you. We're glad to have you here." And just like that, I realized something. For the first time in my entire life, I was free. The government doesn't move quickly, unless it smells blood and money. And in this case, it smelled both. Within 72 hours of the raid, every corner of the Chandler empire was officially gone. Not metaphorically. Literally. The mansion I grew up in, the marble floors, the imported chandeliers, the endless halls filled with portraits of men who believed they were gods, was stripped bare. Property seized. United States Department of Justice. Signs hung on the black iron gates that once kept everyone out. Now they kept no one in. The estate was scheduled for auction. Luxury cars, rare art. The wine cellar Nathan bragged about with bottles costing more than some people's homes. All going, all gone. The Greenwich community that once treated my family like royalty flipped the switch so fast it was almost impressive. Overnight, the same neighbors who'd nodded respectfully at my father's Bentley now crossed the street when they saw federal agents boxing up the grand piano. And then came the calls. Not to the Chandlers, to me. Journalists, attorneys, former family friends looking to save face. Even a few CEOs who'd quietly distanced themselves from the fallout wanted to connect over coffee. Ethan, you always had integrity. We knew you were different. If there's ever a place for you in our firm, you did the right thing. The hard thing. That matters. I kept it polite, but the answer was the same every time. Thanks, I'm not looking. Because I wasn't interested in joining another empire. I was building something else entirely. The DOJ moved fast. Public pressure does that. By week's end, every offshore account Nathan thought was untouchable had been seized. The Singapore shell gone. The Dubai laundering route dismantled. Cayman Islands frozen solid. Moreland's private holdings liquidated. Every yacht, every townhouse, every cent he hid behind corporate veils evaporated. Even Vivian's prized art collection paintings she'd smugly told me were investments that never lose value was auctioned off to cover restitution payments. Their network unraveled. Fast. Ruthless. Banks canceled lines of credit. Vendors demanded back payments. Lawsuits flooded in class actions from defrauded investors' suppliers, and even foreign governments burned by Axiom's fake contracts. The SEC, DOJ, IRS, and DOD worked like synchronized predators. And for once, the system worked exactly how it was supposed to. I watched it all, not with satisfaction, not really, with closure. Watching Gerald be paraded into court wearing the same orange jumpsuit he once joked was for the peasants was a full-circle moment I never expected to witness. And it wasn't just him. Nathan, once the golden boy of Wall Street, stood there looking 10 years older, in a week his hair disheveled, his arrogance hollowed out. Vivian. She tried, claimed ignorance, victimhood, cried in court, but the paper trail was 1,000 miles long, and her signature was on every document that mattered. No mercy. The judge was brutal. This case represents not just white-collar crime, he said. It represents a systemic betrayal of trust, a betrayal of employees, of investors, of the American taxpayer, and of the men and women whose lives were endangered by defective defense equipment. The sentences were handed down. Gerald, 35 years. No parole. Nathan, 28 years. Financial restitution exceeding $450 million. Vivian, 22 years. Disbarred. Assets seized. Richard Moreland, 30 years. Corporate ban for life. None of them left that courtroom free. None of them ever would again. Then came the dismantling of Axiom Defense itself. A name once synonymous with American military dominance was now a cautionary tale taught in ethics courses and FBI Academy seminars. The Pentagon publicly terminated every contract. Assets were seized, patents reassigned, facilities shut down or redistributed to ethical contractors. The message was clear. Corruption doesn't get grandfathered in. Not anymore. For the first time in my life, the name Chandler no longer opened doors. It closed them. Permanently. And as the dust settled, a different kind of work began. I spent months setting up the Chandler Integrity Project, a foundation designed to protect whistleblowers in defense contracting, assist military families defrauded by companies like Axiom, and fund investigative journalism focused on government and corporate accountability. It wasn't charity. It was payback. Not just for me. For every soldier who'd trusted the gear that failed. For every taxpayer lied to. For every person told that wealth was worth more than integrity, the money to fund it. Oh, it was poetic. Every dime came directly from the liquidation of the Chandler family's seized assets. The mansions, the cars, the yachts, the art collections. If our name's going to be remembered, I told the first board meeting, it's going to be for doing something right. For once. The media tried to turn me into something else. A hero, a renegade, the general who brought down his own family, the soldier who fought corruption at home. It made for a good headline. But that wasn't what this was. This wasn't revenge. This was survival. 6 months later, I stood on the front lawn of the Greenwich estate one last time. Not as a Chandler. Not as the disgraced son. As the man who burned it to the ground and walked away whole. A government auction was underway. Wealthy bargain hunters circled the property like vultures. A $70,000 grand piano sold for $8,000. A bottle of wine, once appraised at $35,000, went for $600. It wasn't just liquidation. It was erasure. A thin man in a tailored suit approached me, eyeing the estate. Hell of a house. You thinking of bidding? I smiled. Not a chance. Why not? I glanced back at the gates. Because some things aren't worth buying back. And I walked. My new life wasn't built on marble floors. It wasn't funded by fraud. It was simple. Honest. A modest house in Westchester. A backyard with a grill. Neighbors who didn't know my last name, or if they did, didn't care. I planted trees, cooked dinner, took walks. I slept better than I had in 20 years. No marble, no lies, no legacy to suffocate under, just peace. And one evening as the sun dipped below the trees, a little voice tugged at my shirt. Dad, I knelt. Yeah, buddy. Are we still Chandlers? I looked at him, really looked, and I smiled. No, we're something better. He grinned, ran back toward the yard, and as I watched him, I realized the truth. The real legacy wasn't money, wasn't power, wasn't control. It was freedom, freedom to walk away, to start over, to choose who we are. And for the first time, we were free. It's strange how quiet life becomes when the noise of legacy finally dies. No more headlines, no more cameras, no more whispered judgments from marble hallways or gold-plated boardrooms, just the sound of birds outside my kitchen window, the rustle of leaves in the backyard, the hum of a world that no longer cared about the Chandler name, and neither did I. In the months that followed, the legal machine kept grinding. Appeals denied. Assets redistributed. Restitution funds paid out to veterans' military families and the contractors who'd been cheated for decades. And Gerald Chandler. He faded. Quietly. Powerless. A man who once sat at the head of a billion-dollar empire now woke every day in a concrete cell where nobody cared who he used to be. His calls went unanswered. His name became a punchline, then a warning, and finally, silence. There were no visitors. Not from me, not from anyone. His last play for relevance came in the form of a handwritten letter sent to me through prison mail. 10 pages, front and back. It wasn't an apology. Gerald Chandler didn't know how to apologize. It was a confession. A man desperate to be remembered for anything other than what he'd become. Listing his achievements, his sacrifices, his justifications. Pages filled with lines like, "I did it to protect the family, and you were never supposed to understand. I read it once, then set it on fire. Because I did understand, I understood perfectly, and I was done." The world didn't mourn the fall of the Chandlers. If anything, it healed faster than anyone expected. New contractors filled the void axiom left behind companies that actually delivered what they promised. The DoD revamped oversight. Auditors were tripled. Whistleblower protections became law. The scandal became a textbook case taught at every major law school business program and military ethics course in the country. The Chandler collapse. How greed, arrogance, and corruption undid an empire. It was fitting, but I had no interest in watching that chapter retold by academics or pundits. My story didn't live there anymore. It lived here, in this small house, in the quiet, in the simple routines I'd built from the ashes. Some mornings I still woke expecting the fight. The next mission, the next briefing, the next betrayal. But the fight was over. I won. Not because they lost, because I walked away whole. The Chandler Integrity Project thrived, not as a monument to my family's failure, but as proof that one person can stand against the machine and survive. We funded investigations, protected whistleblowers, helped military families claw back money stolen by corrupt defense contractors. And when people asked why I did it, why I risked everything to burn it all down, I gave them the only honest answer. Because no one else would. There's a kind of peace that comes when you stop asking broken people for validation, when you stop bleeding for someone else's idea of who you're supposed to be. My father spent his entire life teaching me that power was everything, that control was love, that money was the only security that mattered. He was wrong. Love was standing up when everyone else sat down. Security was knowing that even if I lost everything, I never lost myself. And power was the moment I realized I didn't need their approval, didn't need their inheritance, didn't need their name. I was already whole. One afternoon, as the sun dipped behind the tree line, my son sat next to me on the back porch, legs swinging, quiet, thinking. Finally, he asked Dad, "Do you think they ever loved you?" I didn't answer right away, because the truth is it didn't matter anymore. Maybe I said, but they didn't know how. He nodded like that made perfect sense, because to him, to this life we'd built, that answer was enough. As the sky darkened, I stood, walked to the flag folded on the mantel, ran my fingers over the fabric. This was the only legacy that mattered. Not the name, not the money. The choice. The stand. The truth. And for the first time, maybe ever, I was proud of the man I'd become, of the family I'd built, of the silence where their judgment used to live, of the freedom I'd fought for not just overseas, but right here in my own bloodline. Because this wasn't just the end of the Chandler legacy. It was the beginning of mine. Sometimes the greatest battles aren't fought on distant battlefields or inside boardrooms. They're fought within ourselves, in a world that often teaches us that power means control, that success means dominance, and that loyalty means silence. The truth is far more complicated. There comes a point when we all face a choice between preserving appearances or standing for what's right, between continuing the cycle of harm or breaking it no matter the cost. And when you do choose truth, it's rarely easy, it's rarely clean, but it's always worth it. Because at the end of the day, legacies aren't built on money, not on titles, not on empires. They're built on the choices we make when no one's watching. The courage to walk away, the strength to say, it ends with me. And sometimes, choosing freedom over legacy is the most powerful decision of all. Thank you for watching this story. If it resonated with you, take a moment to share your thoughts in the comments. Let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you haven't already, be sure to like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We'll see you in the next story. Ask ChatGPT.